My name is Claire Whitmore, and if you ever looked at my family from the outside, you probably hated us. Perfect house, perfect smiles, perfect Sunday brunches. But perfection is a costume, and ours was stitched with silence. Trust me, you'll regret skipping this story. So before you sit back and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Grace's Truth. Now get in the mood to listen to this story because it might be the ultimate sweet revenge. There's a family photo in our living room framed in gold. It was taken when I was about 12. I'm sitting on a floral love seat between my mother and father with my younger sister Anna perched neatly on the armrest. My father's hand is resting gently on my shoulder. Everyone is smiling wide, clean, effortless. People always said we looked like a Hallmark card, but if you stare long enough, you'll notice something strange. My smile doesn't quite reach my eyes, and Anna's arm is slightly tense, like she's pulling away even as she leans in. It's the kind of photo that tells two stories, the one that's seen and the one that isn't. We were that family in our neighborhood, the ones who hosted barbecues with cloth napkins and Martha Stewart recipes. My dad coached Little League. My mom made pot roasts and wore pearls on Sundays. Anna and I had matching dresses until we were old enough to start complaining. Even then, our mother insisted we look well put together whenever anyone was watching. And someone was always watching. But no one ever asked what happened when the curtains were drawn. No one noticed that my father's voice lowered to a simmer when he was angry, never loud but full of something that made your stomach twist. Or that my mother sometimes stood at the kitchen sink staring out the window for hours, hands submerged in cold water, not moving. No one noticed when my brother vanished from our lives entirely. Oh, yes, the brother no one talks about. If you've never been in a family that runs on appearances, let me tell you this. What's left unsaid will eat you alive. But it does so quietly, with manners, with a smile. I didn't start questioning things until my 40s. Funny, isn't it? You'd think you'd catch on earlier. But when everyone around you is committed to the illusion, you start thinking you're the one seeing it wrong. Until the day something cracks. That day for me was last Thanksgiving. We were all at my parents' house, the same suburban home I grew up in. The table was set to perfection as always, white linens china that only comes out twice a year. Wine glasses no one was allowed to actually hold by the rim. My mother was carving turkey. My father was going on about retirement accounts. Then Anna said something that froze the air. She was laughing, swirling her wine glass, and said, "Remember when we used to pretend Daniel didn't exist? God, we were such little soldiers." My fork paused halfway to my mouth. Daniel, she said his name. I hadn't heard that name aloud in over 30 years. I looked at my mother. She didn't flinch, but she froze just a fraction of a second too long. My father cleared his throat. Anna realized what she'd done and quickly raised her glass in a mock toast. To secrets, she said with a tight smile. And stuffing. No one laughed. We moved on. Talked about sales at Target. About who was making dessert. About the new neighbor's weird dog. But I couldn't stop hearing the name in my head. Daniel. My brother. The one who, according to my parents, left home for good when I was 5. The one we never mentioned again. The one who, now that I thought of it, had no photographs in the house. That night, after everyone had left, I stayed behind to help clean up. My mother and I worked in silence for a while. The air between us was thick with something neither of us wanted to name. I finally asked her softly, "Why did we stop talking about Daniel?" She didn't look at me, just wiped down the counter and said, "Some things aren't meant to be remembered." I didn't sleep that night. Because the truth is, I did remember him. Just flashes. A boy with sandy hair. A laugh that echoed down the hallway. A hand that held mine in the dark when I was afraid of monsters. And then, gone. No goodbye, no funeral, just vanished. Like a stain scrubbed too hard until the fabric tore. That was the beginning. The moment the curtain twitched just a little. And I saw that the stage beneath our perfect performance was rotting. But if I'd known where the thread would lead, If I had any idea what secrets lay buried under my family's pristine garden, I might have turned back. But I didn't. Because I had finally said his name out loud in my mind. Daniel. And once you remember one lie, the others start to scream. The next morning, I woke up with a strange weight in my chest, like something had broken loose in my sleep, and was now pressing down from the inside. I thought of Daniel again. Of his name echoing through Anna's wine-tipped laugh. Of my mother's ice-cold dismissal. Some things aren't meant to be remembered. What kind of mother says that? I decided not to go home just yet. I told my husband I needed to stay a little longer and help clean up more something about freezer containers and leftover pies. It was a flimsy excuse, but he didn't question it. He never does when it comes to my parents. He thinks they're charming. He's never heard the cracks in their voices when they lie. Around 10 a.m., I went back to my childhood home. My parents were out grocery shopping. Of course, because even after hosting 20 guests the night before, appearances had to be kept. The fridge had to be replenished, the sink empty, the front steps swept clean. I let myself in with the key I still had from high school. The house smelled like lemon polish and aging fabric. I walked through it slowly, not as a daughter visiting, but as someone surveying a scene. There was no photo of Daniel anywhere. Not on the piano, not in the hallway, not even in the dusty albums stacked in the den. It was as if he had never existed. But Anna remembered. I remembered. Which meant they'd chosen to erase him. That was the real betrayal. Not just the lie, but the belief that we wouldn't notice. I found myself drawn to the basement. It always scared me when I was young. The narrow stairs, the thick damp smell, the single dangling bulb that never fully lit the space. As a child, I imagined ghosts lived down there, quiet ones that watched, but never moved. But now I wondered if it wasn't ghosts I had felt. Maybe it was secrets. The air was cooler as I descended. I flipped the light switch and the bulb hummed to life. The basement was cluttered bins, boxes, tools. Nothing unusual, but something pulled me toward the far wall. An old bookshelf, mostly used for hiding junk, and behind it a door. I swear to you, I'd never seen that door before. It wasn't hidden well, just obscured by years of purposeful arrangement. My heart started to race. I reached forward, half expecting it to be locked. It wasn't. It creaked open. Inside was a small room. No windows. A bare cot in the corner. A child's blanket folded neatly on it. A bookshelf with a few old toys. And a set of letters stacked rubber-banded yellow with age. Each one addressed to D. I stood frozen, staring. It was a child's room. A secret room. And someone had lived in it. I sat on the cot and picked up the first letter. The handwriting was childish, crooked lines, misspellings, ink smudged by what looked like tears. Dear D, I'm sorry for telling Mommy about the frog. I didn't know she'd get so mad. Please come back upstairs. I miss you. The next one was similar. Dear D, Daddy said if I pretend you're gone, he'll let me have dessert again. But I don't want dessert. I want you. There were at least 20 of them, all from me. I had written them, but I had no memory of doing so. The shock hit me like ice water. I had written to my brother while he was being kept down here, and then had it all wiped from my mind. No, that couldn't be. And yet my handwriting, my words, something inside me cracked open. I looked around the room again. The cot was too small for a teenager. Daniel was older than me, which meant this room wasn't for him. It was for me. But why? What were they trying to erase? I ran upstairs and confronted the hallway closet where my parents kept old photo albums. I yanked out every book, every dusty binder filled with plastic-sleeved memories. I searched each page carefully. Vacations, birthdays, Christmases. Anna was in them. I was in them. Daniel was not. Not once. And in the earliest albums, something else was wrong. There were photos where I didn't appear until much later than I remembered. Like I'd been added or replaced. It felt impossible, like I was chasing shadows. But then I found a small Polaroid tucked inside a yearbook. A boy and a girl. The boy was clearly Daniel. The girl was not Anna. And it wasn't me either. I turned the photo over. In faded ink it read, Danielle and Elise, summer 1983. Elise. Who the hell was Elise? And why had I never heard that name before? The front door opened. My parents were home. I stood in the hallway holding the photo like a weapon. My mother walked in, eyes instantly narrowing. She saw the albums on the floor, the open closet, the old Polaroid in my hand. She didn't ask what I was doing. She just said calmly, "Put that back where you found it, Claire." And in that moment, I realized something bone deep. She wasn't surprised. She'd always known I would find it someday, and she was ready to lie again. But I wasn't the little girl with questions anymore. I was a woman with evidence, and I was going to rip this family's perfect mask clean off. I didn't put the photo back. I slipped it into the side pocket of my coat while my mother started unpacking groceries like nothing had happened. I watched her carefully, noting how her hands trembled only slightly as she unwrapped a block of cheddar. Her face, still flawless, still powdered just enough, did not crack. Not even a flicker. "Do you remember this name?" I asked softly. "Elise." She paused. Just for a moment. The kind of pause you could miss if you weren't trained to see it. But I saw it. The tightening of her jaw. The breath caught halfway up her chest. She didn't turn to face me. "I don't know who that is," she said evenly. I walked over to the kitchen table and laid the photo down face up. The children in it smiled at the camera, sunburned and barefoot. The boy, Daniel. The girl, presumably Elise, had a tooth missing. Her eyes were wide, curious, and unmistakably ours. Then why were they in our backyard in 1983? My mother didn't answer. From the hallway, my father's voice cut in. "Because Elise was never supposed to stay." The air fell silent. He walked in, set his car keys on the counter, and gave me a look I hadn't seen in years. Not anger. Not shame. "Warning. She wasn't our daughter," he said. "Not really. But she lived here," I said. "For a while." "For how long?" He didn't respond. My mother finally sat down, hands folded neatly. "It was a different time," she began. "There were programs, arrangements. Some girls came to stay. Elise was one of them. She was placed with us temporarily." "You mean fostered?" I asked. But even as I said the word, I could feel it didn't fit. "She wasn't registered," my father replied. "Not in the traditional sense. It was all quiet." "Illegal," I whispered. "Discreet," my mother corrected. I thought I had been standing on a shaky foundation, but now I realized there was no ground at all. My parents, model citizens, the pristine couple of the community, had taken in children under the table. And somehow, I'd never known. "How many were there?" I asked. Neither of them answered. That silence told me everything. I left. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just walked out of the house that had built its identity on secrets and pretense, and slammed doors. The house with the invisible sibling and the locked basement and the children whose names were never meant to be spoken again. When I got home, I sat at my kitchen table and took the photo back out. I stared at Elise's face, trying to remember. And suddenly, a sound echoed in my mind. Laughter. A high, bright laugh ringing from the branches of a magnolia tree in the backyard. A girl shouting, "Push me higher," a blue ribbon tied around her wrist. I had known her. I had played with her. And then one day she was gone. No goodbye, no explanation. Just like Daniel. I couldn't sleep that night. My dreams were cluttered hallways that turned to tunnels, doors I couldn't open, a child's voice calling for help in a room I wasn't allowed to enter. I woke up gasping, tangled in my bedsheets, the memory of that blue ribbon burning in my mind. I had to know more. If my parents wouldn't tell me the truth, maybe someone else would. I started with county records, dead ends, then old church rosters, school lists, still nothing. But then I remembered my Aunt Rose. She'd always been the odd one out. The one who moved out to the edge of town and stopped showing up at holidays. The one who wore black even to birthday parties and never played the role of sweet, compliant sister. My mother used to say Rose is a little too free-thinking for her own good, which was exactly why I knew she'd be the one to talk. I hadn't seen her in years, but when I pulled into her gravel driveway, nothing had changed. The little red cabin nestled between pines, Wind chimes made of forks and keys, wind curling around like it recognized me. She opened the door before I could knock. "I was wondering when you'd come," she said. No smile. Just that same clear-eyed gaze I remembered from childhood, the gaze that saw through pretense like glass. "I need to ask about Elise," I said. She stepped aside and let me in. The living room was cluttered but warm. Old books, quilts, plants in cracked ceramic pots. A space that held no shame. "She was never supposed to vanish," Rose said. "But they made her disappear anyway." My throat went dry. "She was your sister," Rose said softly. "Not fostered, not temporary. Full blood. Your parents had her 2 years before you. They just didn't want to raise that version of perfect." "What do you mean?" "She was different. Too loud. Too curious. She asked questions. Didn't sit still. They said she didn't fit the picture." My vision blurred. They gave her away. They gave her up Claire, then made sure no one ever mentioned her again. They told Daniel to keep quiet, and when he didn't, well, you know how that went. My knees buckled slightly. I sat down hard on her couch, the old springs creaking beneath me. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" "Because you were the second try," Rose whispered. "The do-over. The second try." Those words sat in my chest like a stone in water, sinking deeper until I could feel the cold settle in my spine. I was the do-over child. The one they kept. The one who fit. Aunt Rose didn't speak again for a while. She just watched me with that heavy quiet that only people who've been pushed out of a family know how to hold. I looked around her small cabin. Her furniture was mismatched. Her roof needed repairs, but the air felt honest. There was no performance here, no script. "You said they made Elise disappear," I finally said. "What happened to her?" Rose's lips parted like she didn't want to say it, but the years had sharpened her into someone who no longer swallowed hard truths. "They sent her away, to a place out in the hills, run by a woman your mother knew. Technically, it was a group home, but back then it was more like a disposal unit for inconvenient children." My stomach turned. "She wasn't the only one," Rose added. "A few other girls ended up there. Quietly. No records. No goodbyes." Why, I asked. Why would they do that? "Because Elise didn't fit the picture," she said. "And your parents, especially your mother, only knew how to love an image, not a person." I wanted to scream, but the rage was trapped under something thicker. Grief, confusion, guilt I didn't earn, but still carried. "Why didn't you stop them?" I whispered. "I tried," Rose said, tears welling now. "I threatened to call social services. I screamed at your father. But they shut me out. Cut me off." I closed my eyes. I could see it clearly now, the web of lies, the silence spun tight around every dinner table and holiday and photograph. I had been raised in a shrine built on erasure, and now the ghosts were demanding to be named. I drove home that night with Elise's name on my lips. Whispered, repeated, held like a prayer. Elise, my sister. I kept hearing her laughter, the phantom sound of it from a time I'd forgotten. I could almost smell the grass and dirt and chalk from those childhood summers. When I got home, I went straight to the attic. My husband was asleep. The house was dark. But I needed to know if anything had been left behind. The attic was filled with the usual debris of family life baby clothes, broken lamps, boxes labeled in my mother's perfect cursive. But in the far corner, tucked behind a dented suitcase, I found a box that had no label at all. I lifted the lid. Inside were drawings, childish scribbles, stick figures, hearts, flowers, and 3 names written again and again. Daniel, Elise, Claire. We had known each other. We had played together. I found a crumpled paper folded over and over, worn thin at the creases. I opened it carefully. It was a map, drawn by a child. At the top, in large letters, our secret fort. A tree, a swing, a path through woods. And then, scribbled in the corner, E+C forever, D2. Tears burned my eyes. This wasn't a fantasy. This was real. They had loved me. We had been siblings. And then, they were taken. The next day, I called every group home in a 100-mile radius. Most didn't exist anymore. One had become a rehab center, another a correctional facility. But one Laurel Glen home for girls still had a landline. I called. The woman who answered sounded tired, maybe 70. She told me the home had closed in 1992 after a series of legal troubles. I asked about records. She told me those had been lost in a flood. Of course. But when I mentioned Elise, her full name, and Daniels, there was a long pause. I remember the boy, she said slowly. Came around once, raised a ruckus, wanted to take her home. Daniel, I asked. Yes. He was brave. Didn't get far, though. They dragged him out. He kept screaming her name. I held the phone so tightly I thought the plastic might crack. Do you know what happened to her? I whispered. Another long pause. I remember she was sent away again. Further this time. Somewhere more private. Where I asked. Please, I'm her sister. She hesitated, then sighed. Check the archives at the county courthouse. Look for sealed guardianship transfers under the name Briarwood. That's all I can tell you. Briarwood. It felt like the next door cracking open. I ended the call, already grabbing my bag. But before I could leave, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. One image. A girl, standing in front of a rusted swing set, wearing a blue ribbon. No caption. No explanation. But I knew. Somewhere out there, Elise was still waiting. The image haunted me. She was older in the photo, maybe in her early 40s, but her eyes hadn't changed. There was something defiant in them. Not anger, not fear. Just presence. As if she had waited long enough, and now she was done waiting. The blue ribbon was unmistakable. I stared at the message, heart pounding. Who had sent it? How did they get my number? Was it her? I texted back. Elise. No reply. Just the ticking silence of an unanswered question. But I wasn't about to stop. I called the courthouse the next morning and asked about sealed guardianship records for a facility called Briarwood. I expected resistance, and I got it. I was told the files were restricted, confidential, non-public. But I had learned something from my mother over the years. If you speak with authority, people don't ask questions. So I lied. I said I was an attorney handling a family estate, that I needed access to a record from 1984 to confirm next of kin, that my client couldn't wait. I made my voice calm, clipped, professional. And it worked. I was told to come in person. Briarwood was a private institution that operated for 10 years in the late 80s and early 90s. Technically, it was for emotionally disturbed girls. But everything I read hinted at something more: brutal punishment disguised as treatment, isolation passed off as healing. They had buried girls there in more ways than one. The file they handed me was thin. Just a name, Elise Whitmore. Date of transfer, August 1984. Location confidential. Status adoption pending. And then nothing. No adoptive family name. No forwarding address. She had vanished again. But there was a handwritten note in the margin. Faded, barely legible. Attempted contact by sibling. Rejected. My fingers trembled. Daniel? He had tried to reach her, and they turned him away. I left the courthouse in a daze, walking through sunlight that felt too bright. I sat in my car and looked again at the photo on my phone. Her face, the ribbon, the swing. I zoomed in, scanning the background. Something about the fence looked familiar. Then I saw it, a small sign, weathered, hanging crooked on one post. Rosefield Mobile Estates. I froze. That was in Millstone, less than 30 miles away. I put the address into my GPS and drove. The road narrowed as I got closer, the houses turning from brick to trailer, from manicured to overgrown. I pulled in slowly, scanning the numbers until I found the right one. A pale yellow trailer with peeling trim. There was a swing set out front. Empty. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again, harder. A curtain shifted in the front window. Then the door creaked open. She stood there, framed in the doorway. A little shorter than I expected. Her hair was streaked with silver. Her eyes were darker than mine, but familiar. And the ribbon, now faded and frayed, was tied loosely around her wrist. Elise, I said. She didn't answer. She just looked at me, long and hard. And then, "You're Claire," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. I nodded. Her eyes welled instantly, but no tears fell. I wasn't sure if you'd ever find me, she said. I stepped forward, my voice catching. I didn't even know you existed. They made sure of that. She opened the door wider. And for the first time in 40 years, my sister let me in. Her home was small, lived in, and tidy. The couch sagged in the middle. A chipped mug sat half full on a coaster. There were no family photos on the walls, only drawings. Abstract, swirling shapes in blues and grays. We sat across from each other in silence. There was so much to say that neither of us could speak. Finally, Elise reached for a drawer in her side table and pulled out a single object, a bracelet made of string and beads. 3 letters. D-E-C. Daniel made it, she whispered. I remember those, I said. We used to make them with colored thread. You wore yours until it broke, she said. I kept mine. I felt tears rising, but I held them in. You remember us? Every moment, she said. Every laugh. Every scraped knee. Every time we got in trouble together. And the day they took me away. I don't know why they... Yes, you do, she interrupted. You were perfect. I wasn't. I looked down. I wasn't perfect, I said quietly. I know, she said. But they thought you could be molded. I was already too wild. I'm so sorry. Elise nodded. Me too. We talked for hours. She told me everything. About Briarwood. About the families she'd been passed through. About the nights she cried herself to sleep whispering our names. About the day Daniel tried to find her, and how he never came back. They said he died in a car accident, I told her. She shook her head. He didn't. I looked at her. She reached into the drawer again and pulled out a folded envelope. Inside was a newspaper clipping. Unidentified male found dead. No foul play suspected. The date was 6 months after Daniel had last visited her. It was him, she said. I know it. I stared at the grainy photo of the shoreline. Where was this? By Briarwood. My blood ran cold. They covered it up, I said. They always do, she whispered. We sat in silence, both of us holding pieces of our brother like relics. I wanted to scream, to break something. But Elise reached out and took my hand. We survived, she said. That's what matters now. No, I said. It's not enough to survive. I looked her in the eye. It's time to speak. We made a plan that night. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't justice either, not in the legal sense. Elise and I both knew too much time had passed, and too many records had conveniently flooded, burned, or disappeared. But truth still had weight. And we weren't going to keep carrying the lies of others just to protect their legacy. It began with names. We sat at her kitchen table under a dim bulb and wrote them down, every child she remembered from Briarwood, every girl who disappeared in the middle of the night, every whisper of someone sent away. She couldn't remember all of them. Some were just initials, others only nicknames. But it was a start. It was a... Then we added Daniel, and ourselves. At the top, Elise wrote, "Children erased by silence." We were going to remember them. Out loud. The first step was telling Anna. I didn't trust my parents anymore, not with a truth this sacred. But my sister had cracked the seal that Thanksgiving night. She remembered Daniel. She felt the tension. I believed she deserved to know the rest. When I called her and asked to meet, she sounded hesitant. When I said I wanted to talk about Daniel, her voice dropped low. I was hoping you'd say that. We met at a coffee shop halfway between our houses. She was already seated when I arrived, a scarf tied around her neck, hands wrapped around a cappuccino. She looked up at me and said, "So, what did you find?" She didn't need convincing. Not after I pulled out the photo of Elise and Daniel. Not after I showed her the drawing from the attic. The map with E+C forever. Anna covered her mouth. Her eyes filled fast. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Elise?" She remembered her too, vaguely, but she remembered. She braided my hair once, she said. Tied it with a blue ribbon. Mom was furious. We sat in stunned silence for a while. And then she said the thing I'd been dreading. What now? I hesitated. Because what now wasn't just about discovery. It was about confrontation. We're telling them, I said. Anna blinked. Mom and Dad. Yes. They'll deny it. I don't care. They'll turn it around on us. I still don't care. She looked down at her hands. Do you think they'll ever admit it? I didn't answer, because I already knew. They wouldn't. But that wasn't the point. We weren't doing this for their admission. We were doing it to end their erasure. That Saturday, Elise came with me. We pulled into my parents' driveway mid-afternoon. The sun was high and the street was quiet. Suburbia held its breath. Elise sat in the passenger seat calm but visibly braced. She wore the ribbon again, this time in her hair. Are you ready? I asked. I was born ready, she said. We rang the doorbell. When my mother opened the door and saw her, she didn't speak. Her lips parted and then her eyes did something I've never seen. They went glassy, like her soul had left her body for a moment. Elise stepped forward, calm and quiet. Hi, Mom. It was like dropping a bomb in a library. My father came to the door seconds later. His reaction was colder. He didn't show surprise. Just that controlled fury he used when someone stepped out of line. You shouldn't be here. I was, Elise replied, for a long time. Then you decided I wasn't. No one moved. Then my mother opened the door wider and stepped back. And just like that, we entered the house of lies. The confrontation wasn't loud. It was surgical. We laid out the evidence, photos, letters, the bracelet, the adoption records. Elise read their names out loud, one by one. Every girl she remembered. Daniel's name came last. That was the only time my mother cried. Not when Elise said you left me. Not when Anna said you made me forget her. But when she heard Daniel's name and saw his bracelet, she turned away and sobbed into her apron. I'd like to tell you that she confessed everything right then. But no, she didn't. She said they had been young and pressured and didn't know what to do. She said Elise was difficult. She said Daniel couldn't let things go. And then she said the words I will never forget. We had to make a decision, for the family. I stood up. You made a decision for yourselves. Not us. Not them. Elise stood too. She looked at my father and said, I survived you. And then she walked out the door. Anna followed her. And I, for the first time in my life, did not stay behind to clean up. That night, the three of us sat together again, Elise, Anna, and me, at Elise's trailer. We toasted Daniel. We toasted every child who'd been silenced. We toasted ourselves for finding the courage to remember. And in that tiny kitchen lit only by one flickering bulb, we were a family again. Not perfect, but real. For days afterward, I couldn't stop thinking about that sentence. We had to make a decision, for the family. What does it mean, really, when people say for the family? Because in my parents' world, the family was an image, polished floors, forced smiles, curated stories. Not people. Not feelings. Certainly not truth. Elise, Anna, and I had started talking every day. It was like opening a door we didn't know existed. Our conversations were clumsy at first. Timid. Like we were walking across cracked ice, not sure what might break next. But with each call, the cracks mended. And what grew between us wasn't just understanding. It was memory, reconstructed, shared. A week after the confrontation, Elise invited us to help her with something she called the list. When I arrived, she had spread papers across her table, handwritten notes, names, timelines. She had traced back some of the girls who had been in Briarwood with her cross-referenced names from her memory, with archived school attendance and scraps from old newspapers. She had found 3 women. One lived in Ohio, now running a community center. One had passed away. And the third, her name was Lena, lived 2 towns over. I want to talk to her, Elise said. I want to know what she remembers. I offered to go with her. Lena's house was small and yellow, nestled in the middle of a quiet cul-de-sac. When she answered the door, her eyes darted between us, nervously unsure whether to slam it shut or let it swing open. But when Elise said her name, just her name, Lena let out a soft, disbelieving gasp. Elise. She stepped back. Welcomed us in. Their reunion was quiet but powerful. No shouting. No dramatic gasps. Just 2 women looking into each other's faces, recognizing the girl they once survived with. They talked for hours. About Briarwood. About the punishments. The silence. The attic room where they sent girls who asked too many questions. About the ones who never came back after spending a night there. It was worse than Elise had remembered. Lena had kept journals. She showed us one. Pages filled with the looping, frantic handwriting of a girl desperate to hold on to herself. Some entries were barely readable, written in the dark, pressed hard into the paper. Others were lucid, chillingly clear. They shaved Maria's head today. We're not allowed to say each other's names after dinner. I think Elise is next. Elise read those words with her lips pressed tight. Her eyes shimmered, but she didn't cry. She looked at Lena and said, "I remember you helping me climb the fence." "I got caught," Lena whispered. "They locked me in the attic for 3 nights. I'm sorry." "You made it out," Lena said. "That's all that mattered." On the drive home, Elise was silent for a long time. Then she said, "I want people to know." She didn't mean just us, not just the whispers we traded behind closed doors. "I want to write it all down," she said. "For Daniel. For the others. For everyone who never got to speak." I looked at her, this woman who had been erased, discarded, buried beneath a family's shame, and saw not a survivor, but a witness. "You should," I said, "and I'll help you." She turned to me, eyes wide. "You will." "I've lived in silence my whole life, Elise. I'm done with it." The next few weeks became a whirlwind. We started transcribing Lena's journals. We added Elise's memories. Anna even wrote a chapter, her own account of what it was like growing up in a family that edited its past like bad script notes. We weren't professional writers, but we were truthful ones. We called the project The Forgotten Daughters. Elise wanted to send it to every woman she remembered, to the surviving girls, to the social workers who turned their backs, to the reporters who once brushed off Briarwood as troubled girls acting out. But most of all, she wanted to send a copy to our parents. It arrived at their house in a padded envelope. We didn't include a letter, just a sticky note on the first page. "No more pretending. EC&A." They didn't respond. Not directly. But 2 days later, Anna drove by their house. The perfect flower beds were torn up. The gold-framed family photo was no longer visible through the front window. And the mailbox had a new name taped to it. Whitmore, closed. We didn't need their approval. We never had. What we had now was so much better. The 3 of us, flawed, angry, still healing, were finally telling the truth. And that truth was louder than any lie they had ever told. After the book draft was finished, something unexpected happened. Elise smiled more. Not big, flashy grins, just small, grounded ones. The kind of smile someone gives when they realize they're finally breathing air instead of holding their breath. There was something different about her posture, too. Less defensive, more rooted. As if by telling the truth she was rebuilding herself. Anna and I felt it too. For the first time in our lives, we weren't orbiting the black hole of our parents' silence. We were making new meaning together. The gravitational pull of shame had loosened. But peace, it turns out, makes room for questions. And I had one I hadn't dared to ask yet. What exactly happened to Daniel? We had a date, a clipped obituary, a location. But the details, how he really died, why he was alone, what he'd been trying to do, remained foggy. Elise had her suspicions, but no proof. So we agreed it was time to go to the place where his body had been found. The lake was 2 hours away, past crumbling towns and endless pine. We drove in silence, taking turns gripping the wheel and staring at the horizon. It was autumn, and the trees were bleeding orange and rust. When we arrived, the path down to the water was overgrown. Elise walked ahead of me. "I remember this place," she said softly. "Briarwood would bring us here sometimes, for nature therapy. But it was just a way to say they gave us sunshine." We reached the edge of the lake. It was still, too still, like it had swallowed stories and kept them. I looked around and tried to imagine Daniel here, his last moments, his thoughts, the weight he must have carried. "Why did he come?" I asked. "What was he trying to do?" Elise closed her eyes. "I think he was trying to take me back. From Briarwood." She nodded. "He was 17. They told him no. They always told him no. So he came here. Maybe to wait. Maybe to think. Or maybe because it was the only place left that felt real." There was a bench near the water, broken now, half sunk into the soil. We sat there for a long time, and for the first time in my life I cried for Daniel. Not the myth, not the whispered name, but the brother who fought for us. and was lost in the process. A week later, something else arrived in the mail. A letter, handwritten. No return address. Inside was a single page. He didn't drown. He was running. There were people who didn't want the home shut down. He got too close. We tried to help, but we were too late. I'm sorry. It was unsigned. But Elise read it and said it's from Rosa, who, one of the older girls at Briarwood. She watched everything. She knew things. She's the one who told Daniel where I was. I sat back stunned. You think she's still out there? I know she is, Elise said. But she's still scared. We both stared at the letter. What it meant. What it didn't say. And the way it shifted the story again. No longer just neglect or cruelty, but cover-up. Daniel hadn't just been a casualty of silence. He had been stopped. That night, I looked through our manuscript again. The chapters, the drawings, the letters, the names. It felt powerful, but suddenly not enough. They buried him, I said to Elise on the phone. I know. Then we're not done. No, she agreed. We're just getting started. We contacted a journalist. Not just any writer, but someone known for digging deep into old institutional abuse cases. Anna made the connection. Within a week, we were sitting across from a woman named Janelle, who wore a leather jacket and took notes like a detective. She listened, really listened. Didn't flinch, didn't interrupt. When we finished laying out the whole timeline, she sat back and said, if even half of this checks out, we're looking at one of the biggest suppression scandals in the county's history. She asked for our documents. We handed them over. Every page. No more secrets. Not from us. Not anymore. A month passed. Then two. Then one morning, Elise called me with shaking hands. Turn on the news, she said. I did. The headline read, County launches formal investigation into Briarwood legacy and missing records. They had named Daniel. They had quoted parts of our manuscript. They had shown Elise's drawing on screen. And for the first time in public memory, the ghosts had names. The days that followed were surreal. Our phones didn't stop ringing. Reporters, former residents, even strangers who had heard echoes of Briarwood in their own lives. Some offered stories. Others simply offered gratitude. But one call changed everything. It was from the district attorney's office. They wanted to meet with Elise, with me, and with Anna. When we arrived, we were led into a quiet room. No cameras, no press. Just a woman in a navy suit and tired eyes who introduced herself as Deputy DA Kendra Alvarez. She didn't waste time. We believe your brother's death may have been misclassified, she said. We've reopened the investigation. Elise sat forward in her chair, clutching the bracelet Daniel had made her. Do you think someone— We don't know yet, Alvarez said carefully. But the inconsistencies in the autopsy paired with the new testimony we've received merit further inquiry. I asked the question we were both thinking. Will anyone be held accountable? Alvarez paused. There are people still alive who were involved in the operations at Briarwood. If we can link them to a pattern of negligence or worse, we'll pursue charges. I could barely breathe. Not revenge, but justice, the kind Daniel never got. In the weeks that followed, we sat through interviews, submitted evidence, and told our story again and again. It never got easier. But each time we told it, it felt less like a wound and more like a scar. Something that would never disappear but that no longer bled. The journalist Janelle published a 3-part exposé in the Sunday paper. The Forgotten Daughters, How a Small-Town Family Hid a Dark Legacy. Our names were in it. Elise, Claire, Anna, Daniel. For the first time, his name was in print not as a footnote, not as a tragedy, but as a brother who fought for his sister and lost everything. Elise framed that article. She hung it in her living room, right next to the swing set photo. Then one day, someone knocked on Elise's door. It was a woman, older, weathered, holding a small canvas bag. I think we were friends, she said. Elise blinked, stunned. Rosa. They embraced like people who'd survived a war, and in some ways they had. Rosa came in. She poured herself tea like she'd done it 1,000 times, and then, without prompting, she emptied the contents of the canvas bag onto Elise's table. Letters, photos, an old staff logbook. I kept it, she said. All of it, in case someone ever came asking. Inside the book were names, notes, punishments, transfers. Some names were crossed out. Others were marked with a single X. Elise, I whispered. These are the records they said were lost. Rosa nodded. I saw them burn the others, but I hid this one. We knew what we had, not just proof, but receipts. The DA's office took the logbook immediately. Within a month, former Briarwood staff were subpoenaed. Some denied everything. Some admitted mistakes, but one broke. She testified under oath that Elise had been restrained, isolated, and silenced for days at a time. That Daniel had come looking for her and was escorted off the property. That later staff were warned not to speak of him again. And when Rosa's book aligned with her statement, the case cracked open. The county issued a formal apology to the families of the girls. But for Elise, words weren't enough. She requested a memorial, not for herself, not even for Daniel, but for all the children, the ones whose names had been erased. It was placed at the edge of the lake where Daniel had died. A small stone monument engraved with this: to the children silenced the siblings forgotten, and the truth they never stopped carrying. We remember you. There was a bench next to it, the same kind of bench where we'd first mourned Daniel together. But now it held peace, not silence. At the memorial unveiling, Elise stood before a crowd of 30 people survivors, families, strangers who came to witness the reckoning. Her voice didn't shake. My name is Elise Whitmore. I was erased, but I survived. I was told my story didn't matter, that no one would believe me. But look around. She opened her arms. We are still here, and we are not silent anymore. The wind stirred the lake. Somewhere in it, I imagined Daniel smiling. Finally, his voice had come through us. After the memorial, life didn't exactly return to normal. How could it? But it did settle. Elise moved into a small house near the edge of town. Still modest, but hers. Her trailer had served its purpose. She said it sheltered her through the silence. But now she was building something new. Anna began volunteering at a youth shelter, working with girls who had aged out of foster care. I think it was her way of saying, I see you. I won't forget you. She never said that aloud, but Anna never did need to speak much to make things clear. And me. I started writing. Not just helping Elise with the book, but really writing short essays, reflections, pieces of memory stitched into something legible. At first, it was just for me. Then, one of them got published in a local paper. It was titled, On Loving the Family You Were Never Allowed to Know. The response was overwhelming. Letters came in, emails, even a call from a radio show that wanted to do a segment. It wasn't fame I wanted, not attention. It was connection. If my voice could build a bridge to someone still stuck in the silence, then I'd use it. Every day. And yet, in quiet moments, I still felt him. Daniel. Like a wind that passed through me unexpectedly. I'd see a boy on a bike and think of the stories Elise told, how he used to race ahead, always pretending to be her hero. I'd hear a piano through a window and remember the bracelet, how carefully he'd chosen each color, as if he wanted to tie us together in something that would last. Some days I resented our parents more than ever. Not just for what they did, but for what they stole: the years, the memories, the chance to love freely. But then I'd remember what Elise said. We survived. And I'd breathe. It was spring when Elise got the letter. An official one from the state's Victim Compensation Board. They were offering a formal settlement for her years in Briarwood. It came with a number, a check, and an apology. Elise stared at it for a long time. Then she said, You can't put a price on a childhood. She cashed it anyway, but not for herself. She used it to launch a foundation, the DEC Fund, named after the initials from that old bracelet. Daniel, Elise, Claire. Its mission: to support siblings separated by the foster system and institutional trauma. To offer reunification services, memory tracing counseling. Elise ran it out of her living room for months. Then donors stepped in, volunteers, and before long it was real. Not a memory, not a whisper, but a home. One afternoon, as I was helping her organize mail from families writing to the fund, I found a photo tucked into one envelope. 3 girls, arms around each other, smiling but tentative. The note said, Your story helped us find her. She was taken from us when we were kids. We never thought we'd see her again, but we kept looking. And because of you, we're whole again." I showed it to Elise. She didn't say a word. She just sat down, held the photo to her chest, and cried. Anna joined us later that evening. We had dinner together, real dinner with wine candles, music playing softly in the background. We laughed more than I expected. And at one point, Elise stood and raised her glass. To Daniel, she said, "The one who remembered when everyone else forgot." We echoed it back. To Daniel. I closed my eyes and whispered it one more time, because somehow saying his name felt like a promise, a thread that hadn't broken, just stretched. After dessert, I stepped out onto Elise's porch. The sky was navy blue, the moon full. I thought about everything we had lost, and everything we had built in its place, and I realized something. For all their lies, for all the ways they tried to control the narrative, erase the chapters they didn't like, they couldn't stop the story from continuing. We were the authors now, and we were just getting started. The night air on Elise's porch was still, but my mind wasn't. There was one last place I hadn't gone, one last piece of the puzzle, the house, the one where it all began, the one my parents bought as newlyweds before the secrets, before the erasure, before Daniel and Elise were ripped from time like pages torn from a book. I needed to see it, not for revenge, not even for answers, for context, to understand what kind of place had raised the people who raised us. So I drove there. It sat on the corner of an old road, modest and beige, the porch slightly tilted like it was leaning into the wind. A wind chime clinked lazily by the front window. I stood on the sidewalk for a few minutes, just staring. I didn't know what I expected. Ghosts, maybe. Or maybe something more dangerous, nothing at all. Then a woman stepped out of the house. Late 60s, short gray curls, glasses that slipped down her nose. She looked at me cautiously, but not unkindly. "Can I help you?" she asked. I hesitated, then decided the truth was better than a story. "My parents used to live here," I said. "A long time ago. I was wondering if I could just look around." Her eyes softened. "The Whitmores?" I blinked. "You remember them?" She nodded. "Bought the place from them in '91. I'm Ruth." She opened the gate. "Come on in." The living room had changed, of course. New paint, newer furniture, but the bones were the same. I could feel it. The air of discipline, of held breath. This room, Ruth said, always felt too quiet. We used to call it the library, but it never had books. I laughed just a little. That tracks. We stepped into the hallway and I felt it before I saw it. The bedroom. At the end of the hall, I stopped. "I grew up in this house," I said, "but I was born after they left." She tilted her head. "Funny, because there were always marks on the doorframe, like someone measured their kid's height. But they stopped in the early '80s. I stepped closer, and there they were, still faint, still visible. Tiny lines carved into the wood. D, age 6, E, age 8. Then, nothing. Frozen in time. I reached out and touched them. They felt like grief and truth. Ruth watched me gently. "Can I ask what happened to them?" I took a long breath. "They were my siblings," I said. "Daniel and Elise." She blinked. "I knew it," she whispered. "I only learned about them recently," I continued. "They were removed, forgotten. My parents erased them, but we're writing them back in." Ruth stepped back, surprised. "You're Claire, then?" I looked up. "You know me?" She nodded slowly. "There was a box in the attic, with a name on it. I always meant to find someone to return it to." My heart stopped. She led me upstairs. The attic was dusty, the air thick with insulation and memory. In the corner, a small wooden box sat under a faded quilt. My name, Claire, was carved into it in childlike letters. "I didn't touch it," Ruth said. "Didn't feel right." I knelt down, hands trembling, and opened it. Inside were 3 items. A crayon drawing of 3 kids holding hands beneath a swing set. The middle figure was larger with D written on the shirt. A broken hair clip with a blue ribbon. And a cassette tape, labeled 4C. My throat closed. I looked at Ruth. "Do you have a tape player?" She did. We sat at her kitchen table as she plugged in an old boombox, pressed play. The tape hissed. Then Daniel's voice came through, soft, hesitant, unsure. "Hey Claire, you probably don't remember me, or maybe you never even knew me, but I'm your big brother." Silence. Then, "I don't know if they'll ever let you know about us, but I wanted you to have something. To know we were here. That you were supposed to grow up with a brother and a sister who loved you." More static. Then Elise's voice, younger, brighter. "Hi Claire, I tied this ribbon just for you. You better wear it one day, or I'll come haunt you." Laughter. Daniel again. "We love you even if they won't let us say it." The tape stopped. I didn't. I cried in Ruth's kitchen until I couldn't see straight, because somehow they had left me a message, and it had waited like a secret heartbeat all these years. I took the box home. Elise and Anna and I sat on the porch and listened to the tape again, this time together. "I don't remember recording this," Elise whispered. "You were 8, I said, smiling. She held the ribbon. Anna pressed her hand to the drawing. And me, I finally felt found. We listened to the tape until the ribbon of sound wore thin. Then we listened again. Because in a world that had tried so hard to silence our past, those tiny voices, Daniel's steady, Elise's light, were everything. Proof that we had once been whole, even if only briefly. Elise framed the drawing right alongside the article and the bracelet. It hung over her desk where she had begun writing again. Not just about the past, but the present too. About what it meant to reclaim your life after it had been redacted. "I want to start a podcast," she said one morning over coffee. "About siblings like us. The ones who got lost in the system, or worse, erased by their own blood." Anna looked up from her tea. "You should." "I don't know anything about microphones," Elise said with a shy grin. "That's okay," I said. "You've got the only thing that matters, the voice." By summer, the DEC fund had grown faster than we could keep up with. Donations came in from across the country, some small, some astonishing, but every single one had a note attached. For my sister, who I haven't seen since 1994. For the brother I was told never existed. For the child I gave up but never forgot. It wasn't just a foundation now. It was a movement. Then something unexpected happened. We got a call from a woman named Dr. Mason, an archivist, working with a university's child welfare history project. She had come across the Briarwood expose and asked if we had any original documents. We invited her over. What started as a meeting turned into something bigger. Dr. Mason offered to partner with the DEC Fund to create an official digital archive, a permanent public record of every erased child connected to places like Briarwood. It would be searchable, verifiable, undeniable. Elise looked at me, stunned. "They're going to remember them." I nodded. "Yes, because we refuse to forget." The first name entered into the archive: Daniel Whitmore. Date of birth. Date of death. A photo of him on a swing. And a short biography Elise and I wrote together. He was the oldest. Brave. Loyal. He loved music and solving puzzles and climbing trees. He died trying to protect someone he loved. His voice still echoes. There were no likes, no shares, no viral headlines. Just truth, resting peacefully in a place where no one could erase it again. That night, Anna said something I'll never forget. She was holding one of the letters that had come in the mail from a woman who had run away from a group home at 16 and never looked back. She says reading our story made her call her sister for the first time in 20 years, Anna said. Then, after a pause, "Do you think we're healing people?" Elise looked at her. "Maybe, but I think we're doing something even bigger." "What's that?" "We're giving people permission to remember." I started walking every morning, early before the world was awake. One day, I walked past the old school where I'd once sat in stiff chairs and drawn careful pictures of a family I thought was complete. I remembered how my teachers used to smile at my mother, how well-behaved I was, how normal. No one knew. That, under the surface of my obedience, was a scream no one had taught me how to name. Now I could name it. And better still, now I could answer it. On what would have been Daniel's birthday, we visited the lake. We didn't cry this time. We brought flowers, letters, and one of Elise's podcast microphones. She sat by the monument and recorded a short episode right there on the bench. Her voice was calm, strong. This is for the ones they said were too broken, too difficult, too much trouble to keep. You were never the problem. You were the ones worth saving. Then she pressed stop and just sat. The water lapped softly. Anna took a photo, Elise in the sun, the monument beside her, the lake stretching beyond. And for once, everything felt exactly as it should be. That night, Elise posted the photo with a caption, "Not forgotten, not anymore." And thousands of people wrote back, "Neither are we." It started small, just a few emails from listeners. But by the end of the month, Elise's podcast had over 100,000 downloads. It was raw, imperfect. Sometimes the audio cracked. Sometimes she stumbled over her words. But none of that mattered. Because her voice, it reached people. She titled it, "Erased and Remembered." And in every episode, she told one story, either her own or someone else's, about being separated, silenced, forgotten. She interviewed survivors, siblings, caseworkers who'd left the system in shame, even a retired judge who admitted he'd signed hundreds of placement orders without ever looking past the paperwork. And in one episode, she told my story. It was strange hearing her say my name. Claire was the one they kept, the one who grew up in the after, without knowing what had come before. But when she found out, when she started to remember, she didn't turn away. She came back for me. I cried in my car the first time I heard it, because in all the chaos, in all the grief, I never once thought of myself as brave. But maybe we all were, in different ways. Anna got invited to speak at a child advocacy conference. She stood on stage in a room full of professionals, lawyers, therapists, case managers, and told the truth about our family, our lies, our erasures, and the slow, difficult act of repair. When you tell a child to forget, you're not protecting them. You're just building a house on top of a sinkhole. It will collapse. Maybe not right away. Maybe not for decades. But eventually, the truth comes through. People stood to clap. But Anna just walked off stage quietly, because for her the real victory wasn't applause. It was the silence that followed, the deep thinking silence that meant her words had landed. One morning, Elise called and said, "You need to come by." When I arrived, she was waiting at her door with a wide grin. Inside, her living room was covered in sticky notes. Every color, every shape. I laughed. "Did a stationery store explode in here?" "No," she said. "It's my next book." I blinked. "Next." She grinned. "You didn't think one story was enough, did you?" This time, she wasn't writing about the past. She was writing about after. Healing. Anger. And the strange, uneven terrain of starting over when you're already halfway through your life. "You should write a chapter," she said. Me. Of course. You were the beginning of my after. And just like that, the story kept growing. Not as a single voice, but a chorus. The DC Fund moved into a real office. Volunteers became staff. Rosa came on board to run programming for young adults who had aged out of the system. She started a mentorship program pairing survivors with social work students who actually wanted to listen. The waiting list grew longer by the week. We raised enough money to fund reunification travel for 42 separated siblings in the first year. 42. The number kept me up some nights. Because I used to think Daniel and Elise were rare. Now I knew they were just the ones I'd seen. There were thousands. Tens of thousands. Still looking for each other. Still waiting for a letter. A name. A voice. One of those reunions happened on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. A girl named Mariah, a boy named Eli. They hadn't seen each other since they were 5 and 3. And now they were 22 and 20. They walked into our office, locked eyes. And just knew. No hesitation. No DNA tests required. Just the kind of knowing that lives in the bones. I watched from the hallway, tears in my eyes, and whispered, "Daniel, this is because of you." Because it was all of it. Every name found. Every story shared. Every bridge rebuilt. It all traced back to that one boy who never gave up on his sister. The boy they tried to erase. Who had left behind a bracelet, a recording, and a legacy. Elise's second book launched on the anniversary of Daniel's death. She hadn't planned it that way. But when she looked at the date on the calendar, her hands stilled over the keyboard. I think you would have liked this, she said softly. We held a small release event at the local library. Nothing flashy, just folding chairs, warm tea, and stories passed from hand to hand like sacred objects. She stood at the podium, the new book trembling in her hands. Its cover was simple, a swing drawn in charcoal hanging crooked under a tree. No title, just her name. I thought the first book was about remembering, she said. But this one's about what happens after. The part no one prepares you for. The part where you try to live in a world that keeps offering you silence when all you want is sound. The room held its breath. So here's the sound, she continued. Here's what happens when the ones they tried to forget speak louder than the ones who tried to bury them. She read the first few pages aloud. And when she finished, no one clapped. They just sat in the silence, letting the truth settle, letting it matter. That night, we lit a candle by the monument again. This time there were others. 10, then 20. Then over 100 people came carrying candles, names, photographs of missing or lost loved ones. Someone strummed a guitar. A girl read a poem about being found by someone who had the same scar behind their ear. It didn't feel like grief. It felt like resurrection. Elise leaned against me, whispering, "This is what I always dreamed family could feel like." I squeezed her hand. I think Daniel knew. Later, Anna told me she'd found something in our parents' attic. Another box. This one was labeled only with a date, October 3rd, 1985. Inside was a sealed envelope, yellowing at the edges. It was addressed to whoever remembers. Anna handed it to Elise. "You should be the one to open it." Elise held it like it might explode. Inside was a single piece of paper. A letter, written in our father's handwriting. "I made mistakes I'll never be able to undo. I believed that silence would protect you, that forgetting would heal. But I see now that all it did was bury us all alive. If you ever read this, know that I did love you, even when I couldn't face what I'd done." No signature. Just that. We sat in silence for a long time. Anna finally said, "Do you believe him?" Elise folded the letter carefully. "I don't need to," she said. "We've already written a better ending." By fall, Elise's podcast hit 1 million downloads. The foundation partnered with 3 universities. Anna was asked to sit on a policy review board for foster care reform. And me. I published my first full-length book. It was called The Ones Who Stayed Behind. A story about what happens to the child who's left with the lies. I dedicated it to Elise and to Daniel. For the brother I never met but always carried. People still ask me, "Do you forgive your parents?" Sometimes I say yes. Sometimes I say I don't know. But mostly, I say this: forgiveness isn't the point, truth is. Because when you shine a light on the places they wanted to keep dark, you don't need revenge. You just need the truth to echo louder than their silence. And that's exactly what we've done. Let me know when you're ready for the final part, part 15, where everything gently fades out and reflects on the journey. My name is Claire Whitmore. And for most of my life, I truly believed I was the only child of a respectable, quiet, well-kept family. Our house was filled with order, schedules, folded napkins, framed photos in neat rows. The kind of life you'd never question because it looked so polished on the outside. I thought our photo albums told the truth. I thought silence meant peace. I thought the absence of chaos meant safety. And I thought that erasure was just part of life. That some things disappear, and you learn not to ask where they went. But I don't believe any of that anymore. Because I've seen what happens when you finally open the doors they kept locked for decades, not metaphorically, but literally. I've seen the yellowed boxes, the buried evidence, the discarded toys and notes and names. I've seen the grief tucked away in corners of attics and hearts. And what I found behind that silence wasn't dust. It was love. Scattered, unacknowledged, waiting like a child on a doorstep. I used to believe healing came gently like warm tea and soft rain. But now I know healing is often loud, messy, disorienting. Healing is the slam of a drawer you weren't supposed to open. The shock of hearing your name spoken by someone who should have grown up beside you. It's the sound of a voice on a forgotten tape whispering, "We loved you," even when they wouldn't let us. We were always a family of 5, even when the photographs only showed 3, even when the stories shrunk us down to 1, even when I didn't yet know that half of me had been erased before I even understood what family meant. Daniel is still gone. There's no fantasy ending here. No miracle. Nothing I do will ever bring him back from the bottom of that lake. But somehow he's more present now than he ever was in my memories. He's in everything. He's in the small monument at the lake where his name is etched, not as a caution, but as a beginning. He's in the voice Elise uses when she records her podcast, strong, sure, but with a tremble that always seems to surface when she says his name. He's in the letters we receive every week from strangers who say things like, "I thought I was crazy for remembering someone everyone else forgot. Your story made me call my sister after 30 years. I didn't know I could still grieve someone I never met." Those letters don't shock me anymore. What shocks me is how many of them there are. I used to think our story was a painful anomaly. Now I understand it's a map, one that others are tracing in the dark. A guide for those who were left behind and told, "Don't ask." A light for those who had the truth stolen from them before they could even pronounce the word. Last week, Elise and I sat together on her porch. No tape recorders, no laptops, no audience. Just us. 2 sisters who were never meant to find each other again but did. The porch light flickered. The sun dipped below the trees. The breeze was soft, brushing over our skin like a question. Elise stared at the sky. Then she asked almost in a whisper, "Do you know what I regret the most?" I waited. She looked at her hands. "That I didn't fight harder to find you." Her voice cracked, and my throat closed instantly. I took her hand. "You did fight," I said. "You left that drawing, that blue ribbon. You recorded a message and buried it like a seed, hoping someday I'd be able to hear it." I squeezed her palm gently, and when I finally woke up to what had been stolen from me, you were already there. Her eyes welled, and then she said something I'll never forget. "That's the thing about love. It waits." We're not perfect. We're still learning how to navigate each other, how to talk about birthdays we missed, inside jokes we never shared, whole decades where we were strangers by design. But we're whole now. Whole in a way I didn't think was possible. Whole in the way a garden is whole even if some flowers bloom late. The swing in Elise's backyard creaks in the wind sometimes. We never replaced it. It's too sacred. A candle always burns beside Daniel's photo on her mantle. And for the first time in my life, I don't feel like I'm standing on some unstable fault line bracing for the next lie to split the ground. I'm standing on solid earth. Because we built it ourselves. Word by word. Name by name. Truth by painful, shining truth. Sometimes people still ask me, "Do you forgive your parents?" And I never know how to answer. Some days I say yes because holding on feels too heavy. Other days I say no, because some choices, especially ones made in silence, echo far too long to forget. But mostly, I say this forgiveness isn't the point. Truth is, because when you shine a light on the stories they tried to erase, you don't need revenge, you just need witnesses. And we've become that for each other, for Daniel, for the hundreds of names we now carry in our work. We are not their secrets anymore. We are the legacy they never wanted to admit. If you're hearing this, if you've made it this far into our story, thank you. Maybe you too have felt invisible. Maybe you've been told to let things go, to stop digging, to leave the past alone. But here's what I've learned. You are not too late. You are not crazy, and you are not alone. If there's a name you still whisper in your sleep, if there's a room in your memory you've never dared to open, you don't have to walk into it alone. We'll go with you. Because around here we don't bury stories. We plant them. And what grows from that kind of honesty, hope, healing, and sometimes the family you were always meant to find. If this story reminded you of someone you lost or someone you found, tell us. leave a comment below. And if you believe in the power of memory, of redemption, of naming what was once unnamed, then subscribe to Grace's Truth. Because here, your voice matters. And especially the ones they tried to silence, those are the voices we raise the loudest.